I've always been fascinated by mysterious disappearances, but one story stuck with me more than any other. The case of Daniel Whitaker, who vanished without a trace from his school in Indiana in 1955. I first heard about it from my grandfather. He grew up in the same town where it happened, and when I was a kid, he would tell me about the eerie things surrounding the case. He wasn't one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but he always said that Daniel's disappearance felt wrong, like something beyond a simple missing person case. Daniel was 13 years old, just a regular kid. He was quiet, well-mannered, and never got into trouble. On a cold morning in November 1955, he went to school like any other day. He sat through his morning classes, played with his friends at recess, and even checked out a book from the library. But then, at some point during the school day, he simply ceased to exist. The last confirmed sighting of him was around noon. A teacher remembered seeing him walking down the hallway toward the restroom. When he didn't return after some time, another student was sent to check on him. But when they got there, the bathroom was empty. No sign of Daniel. No sign of anything unusual. At first, the teachers assumed he had skipped class. Maybe he had gone home without permission. But when school ended and Daniel never showed up, panic set in. His parents were called, the police were notified, and a search began. They scoured the school from top to bottom. Every classroom, every closet, every locked storage room. The janitor swore he hadn't seen the boy. The security guard at the front entrance insisted that no student had left the building without permission. But Daniel was gone. The town mobilized, searching the surrounding areas, the woods behind the school, even the nearby lake. Nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle. It was like he had been erased from existence. What made it stranger was that some students swore they heard something unusual right before Daniel disappeared. A few kids in nearby classrooms claimed they heard a weird noise, like a low, droning hum. One girl, who had been in the hallway moments before he vanished, said she felt something strange in the air, like the whole building vibrated for a second. The case made the local news, then the state news. Police from neighboring towns got involved. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Daniel Whitaker never came home. Eventually, the search efforts slowed down. The school moved on. A new group of students filled the hallways, and Daniel's name became nothing more than a ghost story. But my grandfather always swore there was something unnatural about it. Years later, when I was older, I decided to dig into the case myself. I looked through old newspaper archives, police reports, and even spoke to some of the people who had been around at the time. That's when I learned something that made my blood run cold. The school had a history of strange incidents. There were whispers about odd things happening long before Daniel disappeared. Reports of students seeing shadows where there shouldn't be any. Of hearing whispers when they were alone. Of a deep, unshakable feeling of being watched. But the most disturbing thing I found was a report from 1928, almost 30 years before Daniel vanished. It detailed another disappearance. A young girl, about the same age, had gone missing from the very same school. The circumstances were eerily similar. She had been seen walking toward the bathroom, then never seen again. No clues, no witnesses, just gone. The strangest part, one of the last students to see her also reported hearing a strange humming sound right before she disappeared. Curiosity turned into obsession. I started looking into the school's records, searching for anything that could explain why this place had such a dark history. That's when I found something truly disturbing. The land where the school was built had once been the site of an old asylum in the late 1800s. It had burned down in a fire, killing several patients and a handful of staff. The ruins sat abandoned for years before the town decided to build over it. Some locals believed that whatever happened in that asylum left something behind. Something that never really left. They talked about a presence, something that lurked in the shadows of the school, watching, waiting. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and nothing much ever happens. But there was always one story that lingered in the background, whispered among kids and passed down through generations. The legend of the ghost bus. I first heard about it when I was 17. My friends and I had a habit of staying out late, driving around the outskirts of town, looking for something to do. One night, we were parked outside an old gas station, drinking cheap coffee and talking about urban legends, when my friend Mark brought up the ghost bus. According to the story, it was an old city bus that only appeared at midnight on certain roads near the edge of town. People claimed that if you saw its headlights in the distance, you had to turn around immediately, because if it caught up to you, you'd never be seen again. It was the kind of story that sounded like complete nonsense, something older kids made up to scare freshmen, but Mark swore he knew someone who had seen it. He told us about a guy named Eric who had been driving home late one night when he spotted an old bus in his rearview mirror. He hadn't thought much of it at first, but when he slowed down, the bus slowed too. When he sped up, it matched his speed perfectly. Eric had started to panic. The bus was too close, its headlights too bright. He could see shadowy figures inside, but the windows were fogged up, like there was something breathing heavily on the glass from the inside. When he finally turned onto a side road, the bus didn't follow. But when he looked in his mirror one last time, it was gone, vanished without a trace. I laughed it off at the time, but I could tell Mark believed it, and the way he told the story unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. A few weeks later, I found myself alone, driving home late from a friend's house. It was just past midnight. The roads were empty, and a heavy fog had settled in, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a pair of headlights in the distance. Nothing unusual. but something about them made my stomach twist. They were too high off the ground for a normal car, too dim for a truck. As I drove, the lights stayed behind me, never getting closer, but never falling back either. I told myself it was just another vehicle on the road, but when I turned onto a different street, so did it. When I sped up, it did too. I started gripping the wheel tighter, my pulse quickening. I knew the stories were just myths, right? They had to be. But then, I caught a glimpse of it in my mirror. It was an old city bus, exactly like Mark had described. The faded white and green paint, the flickering destination sign that I couldn't quite read. The windows were fogged up, but I swore I could see movement inside. Shadowy figures shifting, pressing against the glass. I turned onto another road, trying to shake it, but when I glanced in the mirror, it was still there. The headlights seemed brighter now, almost blinding. The engine was silent. I should have been able to hear something that big, but there was nothing. Just the low hum of my own car and the pounding of my heartbeat. I took another sharp turn onto a dirt road, my tires skidding on the gravel. The second I did, the headlights disappeared. The road behind me was empty. I let out a shaky breath, laughing nervously. It was just my imagination, right? Maybe I had been too tired. Maybe the fog had played tricks on my eyes. But as I turned my head forward again, my breath caught in my throat. The bus was in front of me, not behind, not to the side, right in front of me, blocking the road. It wasn't moving, just sitting there, waiting. I couldn't see the driver, but the door creaked open with an eerie slowness, inviting me in. The air inside the car felt wrong, heavy, suffocating. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to back up, to turn around, to get as far away as possible. But I couldn't move. The figures inside the bus were clearer now, dozens of them, pressed against the fogged-up windows, their faces distorted and wrong. Some had hollow, empty eyes. Others had mouths that seemed stretched too wide, frozen in silent screams. One of them raised a hand and pointed at me. That broke the spell. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed away. The bus didn't move. It just sat there, doors open, the figures inside watching. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. No sound, no trace, just an empty road ahead. I drove home that night with white knuckles on the steering wheel, refusing to look in the mirror again. I was a sophomore in high school when it happened. It was a small town in Texas, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. Everyone knew everyone, and new faces were rare. That's why, when a substitute teacher disappeared after only one day on the job, it became the kind of story that people whispered about for years. I was in his class that day. His name was Mr. Garrison. Our regular history teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, had gone on maternity leave, so we knew we'd be having substitutes for a while. Most were either retired teachers or young graduates just looking for some quick cash. But Mr. Garrison was different. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s, with an old-fashioned way of dressing, brown slacks, a white button-up, and a tie that looked older than my dad. His hair was thinning, and his deep-set eyes looked too dark, like they absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The first thing I noticed was how quiet he was. Most subs would introduce themselves or crack a joke, but he just stood at the front of the room, staring at us for a few long, uncomfortable seconds before finally speaking in a low, monotone voice. "There will be no talking." That was all he said. Then he turned to the chalkboard and started writing the lesson. The chalk screeched against the board, but he didn't seem to notice. His movements were stiff and unnatural, like he was forcing himself to go through the motions. Something about him unsettled me. The way he moved, the way he barely blinked. It was like he was trying too hard to seem normal. The first half of class was uneventful. But then, about 20 minutes before the bell, something happened that I still can't explain. I was staring out the window when I noticed movement outside. The classroom was on the second floor, so there was nothing but an empty field beyond the parking lot. But in the distance, near the tree line, I saw someone standing there. They were wearing the exact same clothes as Mr. Garrison. Same brown slacks, same white shirt, same tie. I looked back at the front of the room, and he was still there, lecturing like nothing was wrong. But when I turned back to the window, the figure in the distance was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could say anything, the classroom lights flickered. It was quick, just a brief moment of darkness, but enough to send a wave of unease through the room. A few students muttered under their breath, but Mr. Garrison didn't react at all. Then the room got cold. And I don't mean the AC kicked in. I mean the temperature dropped by at least 20 degrees. A girl named Becca raised her hand hesitantly. "It's freezing in here." He stopped mid-sentence. Slowly, he turned to look at her, and for a long, uncomfortable moment, he just stared. No blinking, no expression. Then, in that same monotone voice, he said, "The lesson is not finished." No one spoke after that. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on us. The silence stretched on, except for the faint scratching of chalk on the board. Then the bell rang. The second it did, the tension broke. Students practically bolted out of their seats, rushing out the door. I was right behind them, but as I glanced back one last time, I swear I saw him standing perfectly still, staring at the window, right where I had seen the figure outside. The next day, everything changed. When I walked into history class, Mrs. Caldwell was there. I blinked in confusion. "Wait, you're back?" She looked just as confused as I felt. "Back? I never left." We all glanced at each other. Becca spoke up. "But "What about Mr. Garrison?" Her expression darkened. "Who?" We all started talking at once, trying to explain. But Mrs. Caldwell just shook her head, insisting she hadn't been gone. She even pulled out the attendance sheet, and Mr. Garrison's name wasn't there. We checked the school records. Nothing. No record of a substitute for that day. No sign that anyone had ever filled in for her. It was like he had never existed. That would have been creepy enough on its own. But a few weeks later, I found something that still haunts me. I was in the library, going through old yearbooks for a project. Just for fun, I decided to look up past teachers. And that's when I saw him. A black and white photo from the 1960s. A history teacher. Same name, same face. Mr. Garrison. It wasn't possible. The man in the photo looked exactly like the substitute we had in class that day. But according to the records, he had gone missing in 1965. Vanished without a trace. No one remembers him except for the handful of students who were in that room with me. It's like the school itself erased him. But I know what I saw.